My name is Claire Thring, and I am a senior application specialist at a company called Novasound. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I ended up there and what it is I actually do. When I was at school, I kind of enjoyed most of my subjects. I was a bit of a nerd, and I was pretty good at all of them. So it made it very difficult to choose about where I wanted to go. And it felt like through most of school and university and all of the study you do, you keep being asked to focus in on a particular thing. And I was always scared that I would pick the wrong thing and that I would regret it. But I think the main thing that I'd want to say with this is that in the end, it doesn't tend to really matter exactly what you pick. You will end up in the right place eventually. So I decided to focus in on sciences because everyone said that's the best thing to focus on if you want to have a career, if you want to get a good salary, etc. I actually went and studied maths and physics at university. I went to the University of Warwick. And I found quite rapidly that actually at university level, I didn't enjoy the maths anymore. It got too abstract. I remember a lecture early on where they tried to convince us that if you summed all of the positive integers up to infinity, you'd get -1/27 or something like that. And I went, no, I'm out. I need a little more practicality in my life. So I focused in on the physics. And I really, really enjoyed it. It was fascinating. But I found that a lot of the actual practical aspects of studying physics, when you looked at the real research, ended up being computer science, ended up being statistics, ended up being a lot of sitting at a computer. And while I did enjoy that, I could do some of it, I found that for me, the biggest thing that I really enjoyed was getting to do practical work, getting to do something with my hands, getting to build things. And this actually then made a lot of sense when I thought about growing up. Some of the things I loved doing was being creative. I loved painting, I loved paper mache, I love making things. My parents' house is still full of stuff that I made for them. And I actually found this translated really well into the sciences on the practical side in lab work. And I really enjoyed the lab work. While I was studying physics at university, I also met a really interesting lecturer, Dr. Rachel Edwards. She taught our mechanics modules. And she was also into circus. She did some juggling in our lectures. She did some balancing meter rulers on her chin and things like that. So, I thought she was brilliant. So I went and spoke to her and said, what's your main research area? And it turns out she works in ultrasonics. And there was funding available for students to do summer projects at the university. So I got funding, I applied and got some funding to spend my summer working with her on ultrasonics. And I learned to do generation of ultrasound waves using lasers, which was really fun. I mean, who doesn't love lasers? Pretty cool, right? And what we were doing was generation of ultrasound waves that propagate along the surface of a piece of metal to look for cracks in that metal, which is something I didn't know was a thing either. Most of the time, if you encounter ultrasound, it's for things like pregnancy scans or the medical side of things, but it gets used in industry as well. I enjoyed this so much that I then did a master's project with her group. That was a bit more medical. We looked at osteoporosis and heel bones. And then there was more funding available coming up for some PhD work. So I stayed with her and did a PhD, mostly just because I was enjoying it, not because I was really thinking, this is the career I've always wanted. I don't think many people when they're growing up say, I want to go and be an NBT ultrasound specialist. And I did my PhD making a type of electromagnetic transducer for generating ultrasound. So I spent a lot of time winding tiny little bits of wire around magnets and making new ways of generating ultrasound using these new transducers. And I really enjoyed it. But at some point, I kind of had to stop studying. It's like, okay, now what? And I found a postdoc. For those not familiar with the university system, that's sort of the first kind of research level position you can get after PhD. PhD is technically, you're still a student, although they do pay you a living stipend. And then the postdoc. Postdocs, though, the downside of them is they're always short-term contracts. So I got a short-term contract to move to Glasgow to do some more ultrasonics, since that was now my specialty. And it was quite different what I'd done at university. It was quite medical based. I did that for a year, but I wasn't really enjoying it. The academic system is really complicated because you're constantly scrabbling to get funding to keep doing your work, and it's very hard to get permanent positions. And I thought I need a bit of stability. And it turns out there was a friend of mine who I knew from the university, had the same supervisor as me, the brilliant Dr. Rachel Edwards, and they'd moved to start working at this brand new company called Novasound, just outside of Glasgow. And what they were doing is making ultrasound sensors using thin films, very thin, low profile, flexible transducers, which is quite unusual. So I asked them if they were looking to hire anybody else, and they said, well, send us your CV, we'll consider it. And I started with them, and it was the best choice I ever made. I was quite nervous about it. A lot of people said to me, oh, going and working at a small startup, you're going to work so hard. It's really difficult. But you know what? Best decision I ever made, because there's also so much flexibility. There's so much room for expansion. It's so new. Everything is so exciting. There's so much change. I've been with Novasound 3.5 years now. When I first came in, I was given the challenge of developing a high temperature sensor out of their thin film. They'd done a little bit of initial study, but they hadn't really turned it into a product. So I led the innovation to create this product, and we launched it during the pandemic. I actually got to present at the launch to a lot of important people, which was really exciting, and it's done really well. Last year, I then got promoted to start running the application specialist team at Novasound, which is essentially a group of physicists working on what I was doing, which is things like taking our thin film and seeing what can we turn it into, can we do this with it, can we do that with it. And I've been running that team the last year. There's now 5 of them, and moving into management has been a big experience as well. I was really nervous. I wasn't sure I could do it. But actually I really enjoy it. And some of the best things, most rewarding thing for me has been having some of the staff I manage saying that they find the meetings with me and the support I give them really valuable. And that's been great. So I guess the biggest takeaway, and I know people said this to me when I was studying as well, is try not to worry too much. You'll end up in the right place eventually. Pick something and run with it. And if it's the wrong thing, you can drop it, you can change. Deciding to leave that postdoc was a really hard decision for me. It felt a lot like quitting, but it was the right choice. So if you're not enjoying something, move on, try something else. You can always keep going until you find the right thing. Thank you for listening.